This lesson is going to look at applications of systems of equations. What can you actually solve in real life using a system of equations? So I'm going to take you through two separate examples so you can take a look at what you could solve using a system of equations. So let's look at the first problem. The first problem says the sum of two angles is 180 degrees. Their difference is 50 degrees. What are the two angles? So there are 4 steps to this. The first step is to identify your variables. So I'm going to keep it x and y, as that's what we've been using the most so far. So I have x and I have y. Part of identifying your variables is deciding what they stand for. So what the question is asking you is what your equation or your variables are going to stand for. So the question is, what are the two angles? So I'm going to say x represents the first angle and y represents the second angle. The next step is to write two equations. So here's you have to use the math words as clues to help you write your equation. So the first sentence, I take this sentence by sentence. The first sentence says the sum of two angles is 180 degrees. Sum is the answer to an addition problem. And my two angles, as we defined in step 1, were x and y. So the addition problem was x plus y, or the first angle plus the second angle. And it says the sum is 180 degrees. The next sentence says their difference is 50 degrees. Difference doesn't mean addition like sum did. Difference means subtraction. So I'm going to have my angles subtracted from each other, and then that's going to result in 50 degrees. So step 1 is to identify your variables and tell me what they represent, and it's always what the question is asking. And step 2 is to use the math words in the sentences to come up with two equations for your system. Step 3 is to use any method to solve the equation. So we had our equation x plus y equals 150 and x minus y, or it was 180, I'm sorry, x minus y equals 50. So this already, our equations are lined up in like terms, and we have y's being our opposites. So this would lend itself very nicely to using linear combination or elimination to solve it. So since I already have them lined up, they're already opposites, I can then take both equations and add together. So x plus x is 2x. The y's are opposites, so they cancel each other out. Then I have my equal sign, and 180 plus 50 gives me 230. To solve for x, I divide both sides by 2. The 2's cancel out. I'm left with x. And then half of 230 is 115. To find the y, I have to decide what equation I want to use. I'm going to use x plus y equals 180. And every time there is an x, I'm going to substitute 115. So I have 115 plus y equals 180. To solve for y, I would get rid of the 115 by subtracting 115 from both sides. They cancel out. I'm left with y. And then 180 minus 115, right? We have to borrow. That becomes a 7. 10 minus 5 gives me 5. 7 minus 1 is 6. And then 1 minus 1 is nothing. So I have step number 4 is answer the question. So the question was, what are the two angles? So I'm going to say in a sentence that two angles are 115, don't forget the degree symbol, and 65 degrees. So then I answered the question. So 4 steps when using a system of equations to solve a problem. Step 1, identify and define your variables. Step 2, write the equations for your system. Step 3, solve the system. And step 4, answer the question. Let's take a look at one more example. So this example says I have 55 coins, all of which are dimes and nickels. I have a total of $3.75. How many dimes do I have? How many nickels do I have? So it says to identify the variables. I'm going to use N and D. N is going to be the number of nickels. And D is going to be the number of dimes. If I'm going to write my equation, I'm going to go again sentence by sentence. The first sentence says you have 55 coins. So I would have added my dimes and my nickels together, and that would have given me the fact that I have 55 of them together. The next thing it's talking about is how much they're worth. It says I have a total of $3.75, and they want to know how many dimes and how many nickels. We know nickels are 5 cents and dimes are 10 cents, right? These particularly, I don't necessarily write them as a decimal, because if you use a decimal, that it gets a little bit more tricky when you come to multiplication and division versus if you use whole numbers. So I'm going to say that each nickel is worth 5 cents plus the amount of dimes, which is 10 cents a piece, so it's 10 times D is equal. Notice again I didn't use any of the decimals, so when I put what it equals, I'm not putting a decimal in there either. So instead of 3.75 for $3.75, I'm going to say 375. So now I have my system of equations. Step 3 is to solve the system of equations. So it already is lined up, so I would be using linear combinations or elimination. So let's make the nickels opposites. So if I make the nickels opposites, I need to make the top n -5. So that means I have to multiply the top equation by -5. So if I'm multiplying that top equation by -5, -5 times n is -5n, -5 times d is -5d, and then -5 times 55, first of all, a negative times a positive is a negative, and then if I multiply 55 times 5, right, 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2, 5 times 5 again is 25, plus 2 gives me 27. So I have equals -275. And the bottom equation, I'm not doing anything to, so I have 5n plus 10d equals 375. So now I have my n's opposites, so I can go ahead and add these equations together. So the n's are opposites, they cancel each other out. Then -5d plus 10d gives me 5d, and then -275 plus 375 is 100. I need to then divide by 5. The 5's cancel, I'm left with d, and then 100 divided by 5 is 20. So I know that I have 20 dimes. So what I would do to figure out the number of nickels is you have to use one of your original equations. I would use the top one since it's way simpler. I have n plus d is equal to 55. I know that there are 20 dimes, so I have n plus 20 instead of the dimes equals 55. To solve for n, I have to get rid of the 20 by subtracting 20 from both sides. The two 20s would cancel each other out. I'm left with n, and then 55 minus 20 gives me 35. So step 4 then is to answer the question. So the answer is I have 20 dimes and 35 nickels.